On May 29, 1914, the RMS Empress of Ireland sank in the St. Lawrence River after a collision in thick fog. She carried enough lifeboats for everyone aboard. She had watertight compartments. She incorporated every lesson learned from Titanic 2 years earlier. She sank in 14 minutes. 1,012 people died, more than Titanic in Canadian waters. 10 weeks later, the world forgot she ever existed. You're listening to The Unlit Room. Every story in here actually happened. That's the part that should scare you. New stories every day, Monday through Saturday. This episode's narration is AI-generated. The research, writing, and editorial decisions behind every story are made with care for accuracy and respect for those involved. Today, the ship that drowned 1,000, and the war that made everyone forget. May 28, 1914, 4:30 in the afternoon, Quebec City. Captain Henry George Kendall stood on the bridge of the Empress of Ireland as his ship pulled away from the dock. This was his first trip commanding the Empress down the St. Lawrence. The ship was 570 feet long, 4 steel decks, 2 funnels. She carried 1,057 passengers and 420 crew. Destination, Liverpool, a routine transatlantic crossing. Among the passengers, 167 members of the Salvation Army, the entire Canadian staff band and delegates travelling to a conference in London. English dramatist Lawrence Irving and his wife. Families, children, 138 children aboard. The weather was clear when they departed. The St. Lawrence was calm. By 1:30 the next morning, May 29th, the Empress had travelled downriver to Pointe-au-Père, a pilot station 20 miles from Rimouski. The pilot disembarked. Captain Kendall resumed course, north 76 degrees east, heading out into the broader channel of the St. Lawrence. At 1:45, the lookout spotted masthead lights miles ahead. Another ship, travelling the opposite direction, standard passing protocol, both ships visible, clear night, miles of open water. Kendall noted the bearing and continued. Then the fog rolled in. Not gradual, sudden, thick fog enveloped both vessels within minutes. Visibility dropped to near zero. The only communication between the ships now, fog whistles, piercing the darkness at regular intervals. Both ships slowed. Both captains sounded their whistles repeatedly, but in fog, sound is deceptive. Direction becomes ambiguous. Distance is impossible to judge. At 1:56, the Norwegian coal collier Storstad, smaller vessel, reinforced bow for ice, crashed into the Empress of Ireland's starboard side at midships. The sound, steel tearing, a gaping hole opened below the waterline. Captain Kendall grabbed his megaphone. He shouted across to the Storstad's bridge, "Keep your engines at full power, plug the hole." For approximately 5 seconds, the Storstad's bow stayed lodged in the wound it had created. Then the St. Lawrence current pushed the collier backward. The bow pulled free. 60,000 imperial gallons per second, 270,000 litres, began pouring into the Empress of Ireland. The ship lurched immediately to starboard. 2 years earlier, Titanic had sunk in the North Atlantic. The world had learned lessons. Regulations changed. Ships now carried more lifeboats. Watertight compartments were mandatory. The Empress of Ireland had both. She should have been survivable. The wireless operators, Bamford and Ferguson, sent the distress call. May have struck ship, listing terribly. Below decks, passengers woke to water rushing into their cabins. The lower decks flooded first. Many never woke. The crew attempted to launch lifeboats. But the ship's list, the severe tilt to starboard, made half the lifeboats unusable. The portside boats couldn't clear the ship's side. They swung inward, crashing against the hull, useless. The starboard lifeboats could be launched. 5 successfully made it into the water. The 6th and 7th capsized as they hit the surface. 5 minutes after the collision, the ship's lights failed. Total darkness, fog, frigid water, screaming. And then there were the portholes. The Empress of Ireland's lower deck portholes had been left open for ventilation. Standard practice in the calm, sheltered waters of the St. Lawrence. Against regulations, technically, but everyone did it. The river was smooth, the weather was mild. No one thought it mattered. When the ship listed to starboard, those open portholes, designed to sit well above the waterline in the open ocean, were suddenly only feet above the river's surface. Water didn't just pour through the collision hole, it poured through dozens of open portholes along the starboard side. The flooding accelerated. Micro Cliffhanger 1. The Empress had watertight doors, manual watertight doors, designed to seal off flooded compartments and prevent the entire ship from going down. There wasn't time to close them. 10 minutes after the collision, the Empress of Ireland rolled violently onto her starboard side. The ship lay nearly horizontal in the water, as if she'd run aground on her side. Approximately 700 people crawled out of portholes and over the port side railing onto the exposed hull. They clung to the ship's side, standing on what had been vertical steel plating moments before. The ship stayed like that for a minute, maybe two. Then the bow rose briefly out of the water, the stern dropped, and the Empress of Ireland plunged beneath the surface. 14 minutes. From collision to complete sinking, 14 minutes. Hundreds were thrown into near-freezing water. The Storstad lowered lifeboats immediately, pulling survivors from the river. Rescue ships, the Eureka and Lady Evelyn, arrived within the hour and continued recovery efforts until dawn. Captain Kendall had been thrown from the bridge as the ship rolled. He was pulled under as she sank. He surfaced, clinging to a wooden grate. A lifeboat picked him up. He immediately took command and began pulling others from the water. When he finally boarded the Storstad, soaking wet, he stormed to the bridge and found Captain Anderson. Kendall's words, witnessed by the crew, "You have sunk my ship." By dawn, the count was clear. 465 survivors, 1,012 dead. Of 138 children aboard, 4 survived. Of 310 women, 41 survived. Of the 167 Salvation Army members, only 8 survived. More deaths than Titanic in Canadian waters. The Commission of Inquiry convened in June 1914 under Lord Merz. Both captains testified. Their accounts were irreconcilable. Captain Kendall, Empress of Ireland, claimed he maintained a steady course and that the Storstad failed to maintain its course, turning into the Empress in the fog. Captain Anderson, Storstad, claimed his ship held steady and that the Empress altered course in the fog, turning into the Collier's path. The inquiry noted, if the testimony of both captains were to be believed, the collision happened as both vessels were stationary with their engines stopped. The stories are irreconcilable. One party had to be wrong. The physical evidence, a collision that happened, a ship that sank, proved that. But definitive proof of who altered course, that vanished into the fog with the Empress. The inquiry ultimately held Storstad at fault. The Canadian Pacific Railway, owner of the Empress, won $2 million Canadian from the Storstad's owners for lost silver bullion. The collier was seized and sold for $175,000. But the engineering analysis told a different story. It didn't matter whose navigation error caused the collision. The real killers were the open portholes and the manual watertight doors. Water entering through dozens of open ports along the starboard side. Watertight compartments that couldn't be sealed in time. A 14-minute window where safety systems designed to save lives simply couldn't be deployed fast enough. Both things are true. Someone made a navigation error in the fog, and the ship's design, post-Titanic, state-of-the-art, regulation-compliant, couldn't save anyone when the sinking happened that fast. 1,012 people died in the St. Lawrence River on May 29, 1914. 10 weeks later, July 28, 1914, the First World War began. Newspapers stopped covering the Empress. Memorials were delayed, families grieved in obscurity. The disaster that should have been a household name, the worst peacetime maritime tragedy in Canadian history, became a footnote. The war swallowed the story whole. Titanic is remembered. Empress of Ireland is not. Not because it mattered less. Not because fewer people died. Because the world had something else to think about. 14 minutes. That's what it came down to. Every safety measure from Titanic was aboard the Empress of Ireland. Lifeboats, watertight doors, regulations, inspections. But safety systems need time to deploy, time to react, time to close doors, lower boats, evacuate passengers. 14 minutes wasn't enough. The Empress of Ireland didn't fail because she lacked safety measures. She failed because disasters don't wait for us to be ready, and history doesn't remember every tragedy, only the ones that happen at the right time to be heard. 1,012 people deserve to be remembered. The war decided otherwise. If this one's still with you tonight, good. New stories every day, Monday through Saturday. Subscribe so the next one finds you too. Follow the Unlit Room wherever you listen. Tell a friend who can't sleep. Full story on the main channel. Follow if you're wide awake. That was the Unlit Room. See you in the dark.